Welcome back to the This Week in Fantasy series. I'm your host, VenomousStare. Today we're going to be previewing the Week 9 matchup, so strap yourself in, we're jumping right into it. We're going to review the Week 8 matchups as we always do, so this was a bout between the commish and I where I narrowly achieved victory, and on the forums the commish said something along the lines of freaking injuries. And speaking of, George Kittle got hurt and was so severely injured I had to drop him. This is a top tier tight end, a guy a lot of people reach for into the third round, and to lose him for the rest of the year is pretty brutal for me. But thankfully I still managed to eke out a victory. If you look at the other notable things here, Tom Brady had actually a kind of close game with the Giants. They only won by 2 points, and if Suckup had missed a field goal, the Giants would have come back on him. Drew Brees had a tough little win against Chicago. The Bears are actually a lot better than they have been in the past. The whole Nick Foles experiment, I think, has put a lot of well-deserved pressure onto Mitch, who before, when he had gotten paid and they reached for him to get him that high in the draft, I feel like there wasn't really much pressure on him. Zeke continues to just plummet in terms of value, just like any of the other Cowboys weapons. He's just absolutely at the floor in terms of value. This has a lot to do with the line. Remember, the Cowboys lost Travis Frederick, they lost Zach Martin, they lost Tyron Smith. Frederick retired because of fibromyalgia, but the other two are actually injured this year, so one thing that people don't ever consider about Dak Prescott's really good year this year, he was having until he got injured, yards-wise, I'll say, because he certainly wasn't leading the team to any victories, is that he actually had the line. It wasn't until he got injured that the line really went to crap, or just directly right before then, or a week maybe right before then, because once Andy Dalton came in, it was just an absolute garbage line featuring rookies, so every one of the Cowboys' weapons are just going way down in value. And any term or any kind of watchability the Cowboys have is also going way down in value. Ronald Jones had a rough game versus the Giants where Fournette got a lion's share of the carries. It's because he fumbled really a lot of times when a guy coughs it up and he's in a timeshare, sort of gets his ass benched. It's kind of what happened. Along with the fact that the Giants were more competitive than the Tampa Bay team was really ready for. I love Tampa Bay. They're fun to watch. They're an exciting team with a lot of big names and good weapons. Of course, they added AB, but I really have a good feeling about them going into the playoffs with Brady at the helm and a pretty damn solid defense. Reviewing the rest of this game rather briefly, though, we see the bottom half of my lineup went pretty flaccid. Kareem Hunt did absolutely nothing in a really weird and bizarre Cleveland loss, and overall for Clap 4, even though Ebron got a touchdown and the Harris fella here, Damien Harris, for the Patriots, did manage 100 plus and a touchdown, which is a miracle if you're a Pats running back, because usually you got your Burkhead and your White that are going to come in and cock block just enough for being on the formation, but maybe it's not really like that so much anymore without Tom Brady. Maybe the Patriots will move to like a true run-first team because they've looked pretty bad recently. Buffalo is a good team. I did expect them to win that game, but just not really feeling the Patriots this year. If you're a Buffalo Bills fan or you were going to bet on the division, I definitely was a Bills guy. Even last year I said that the Bills were on the rise, and I think we're seeing a continuation of that this year. For literally over a decade, maybe even around 2 decades, we saw any time Belichick took a couple losses in a row, he was never ever going to lose that third one. He was infallible, and I think that with Tom gone, we see Tom succeeding greatly, and definitely Bill is the one struggling more in that equation. There was a lot of speculation, remember, whether the Patriots were going to actually just be above average, as they usually are, plug and play, sort of like how Jimmy G or Matt Castle, that sort of thing, but oh yeah, any guy can come in and be just as good. That idea, but with Cam Newton getting banged up and just being Cam Newton, I mean, that's really Cam Newton's essence. Is he's always hurt, he's banged up, he's inconsistent, he's careless with the ball, so sort of goofy to say like, well, Cam Newton got hurt. Well, yeah, well, that's part of him. So, yeah, Cam Newton real injury prone. No surprise to see that the offense is dysfunctional. So moving on, this is an important win for me and a brutal loss for Clap 4, who really wants to just keep up with AB. Nice to see Boyd reeling a touchdown. Spencer took out Lilly here. Really, if we look, Galladay didn't get any points at all. Got banged up. And if we just look at the bottom half of Lilly's lineup, no one breaks 10. It's very hard to win when that happens. And even though Gurley has been very solid for her this year, punching in a touchdown despite the low yard count, and Wilson's just been phenomenal. Took a loss to Spencer, who's definitely on the upswing. Remember, Spence went for Adams and Thomas early, and Adams has just been unbelievably filthy since returning from his injury, and remember, was very good before his injury too. And Spencer is always typing, oh, Adams and Thomas, I'm just waiting for them to come back. Of course I'm losing. Adams and Thomas are hurt. And I'm looking at Adams here, ranked top 10 in receivers despite missing 3 weeks. And he's just been God tier these last 3 weeks, dropping 23 plus. And you knew he was going to have a pop-off game this week, and this is one of those. Spencer's playing me, and the Thursday night game occurred, and he already has 23 locked in, so Adams locked in an identical total the week before. Mild kicker getting 8. Good for you, Spencer. Sloppy seconds. Chargers getting 3 in a game which, I mean, the Chargers really can't get out of their own way. And if you look at Denver, there's a team that's sort of stringing together a few wins when a lot of people didn't really expect them to. That Patriots one was just a real world shocker. But Spence takes the W here. Important win for him just to, I guess maintain any semblance of hope. His division is still pretty bad, but AB does control his own destiny, and we're about halfway through the season here, so that'll be interesting to see. Definitely not dead, though. Weston, red hot, dismantled the King of Funny. If you look at the King of Funny's bye here, it really tells the story. But Eagles popped off. Of course, they played Dallas, so which defense wouldn't? Lindsey did very well despite not getting many carries. This is a guy that just has such a high amount of yards per carry and really pounds the ball with authority whenever he gets it. And the fact that they paid Melvin Gordon so much and made him such a big part of their offense is sort of perplexing. When Lindsey is healthy, he's phenomenal. Also, Josh Allen recently, hasn't been what he was early on in the season. 4 weeks in a row with 20 or less. So, I need to take a water swig here. Ugh. So, disappointing there because Ben's team, if you look at his win conditions, especially with these buys, it's really, and Chubb hurt, really relies on Allen popping off. So, we need a subpar. Very difficult. Aaron took out Seagouch here. Jared Goff really didn't look good at all. He had 2 fumbles and 2 interceptions in a loss to a Miami team that looked anemic and awful with the rookie quarterback at the helm, Tua, and it was definitely one of those, oh yeah, you can tell it's a rookie quarterback starting type games, where if you look at a guy like Joe Burrow, already he looks way more developed than Danny Dimes, the fabled New York quarterback, or the infamous leader of the 0-8 JETS jokes, Sam Darnold. Really has it together, that Joe Burrow, where if you look at Jared Goff, I know he's a long way away from being a rookie, but you got to consider how overrated this guy got when they went to the Super Bowl. Sean McVay basically was this guy's brain, like Double Lift had to have a support tell him exactly what to do in League of Legends, basically. Jared Goff was like that, but he had like cop tier mechanics, if you want to complete the league analogy. So Josh Jacobs had 129 rush yards, but a staggering 31 carries. Remember, they love to run over there in Oakland which is really a big part of why Derek Carr's upside has gone down so much. Even whenever they are behind, they don't abandon the run, and that's actually a really good thing. And there are a few teams like that. Really, it's becoming more of a rarity in the NFL. Seemingly now in the NFL, it's like, oh, we're down 7-0. All right, time to run the empty set. We're going to air it out. I don't really like that. I feel like you are really too predictable, and the clock doesn't necessitate that sort of play style. So Gruden understands that, and he runs the shit out of Jacobs, which makes him a great fantasy commodity. Rodgers put up 20 plus, but Edwards-Helaire really struggled perplexingly in a game where he should have popped off. They were ahead the whole time versus the terrible Jets. It's not like Lev Bell popped off. This was actually a game where the third string guys vultured a couple touchdowns, but even then you're facing the Jets. Oh my God. You're facing the Jets, you really have to get it together. Amari Cooper, not startable at this point. There's two other good receivers, and I say good. I mean, Michael Gallup couldn't catch the clap. That guy just is horrific case of pan hands. And he's a drive killer. It would actually be better for Amari Cooper if Michael Gallup had good hands, because then they wouldn't have so many damn 3-and-outs. The Cowboys, who started a 7th rounder, Ben DiNucci, who was just, I don't want to go too hard ham on him because he had 1 week to prepare and he's a freaking 7th round pick, but didn't look good, folks. Didn't look good. And I consider that, and I hear that they announced they're going with basically 2 washouts. It's going to be like, we're going with this washout, and if things get hairy, we'll go with another. And it's terrible. The Cowboys are at rock bottom. I mean, if you look at them as a team overall, between the laughable secondary that can't tackle, the poor linebacking core that even when Van Der Esch is there is mediocre at best, and Van Der Esch can't stay healthy, and an insanely bad defensive line with no ability to rush that DeMarcus Lawrence anchors and somehow never does anything. The Cowboys are just horrifically bad. Horrifically bad. They might actually be worse than the Jets, as insane as that is. Because even though on paper they're better with players like Zeke, I actually think that you have guys like Zeke who are putting out a minimal amount of effort. And you can, obviously point out like, oh, we got paid. But look, the fact of the matter is that comes down to coaching. A coach has to be able to at least get like 90% out of his guys, and looks like Zeke's been checked out all year. As far as the rest of this game goes, obviously Dalvin Cook had a pop-off game, 200 total yards, plus 4 touchdowns. Anytime you have a guy that can get you 40 plus, you're going to auto-win the game. And that's what Aaron did. Seagouch put up an okay 84, but, these games happen probably about 3 or 4 times a year, like to this extent, 40 plus. And Dalvin Cook is actually a guy who gets them more than anyone else, especially if you look at the running back position. Other than that, it's really Aaron Jones. Zeke hasn't really been able to do that in a long time. And it's not like he's fallen off physically. That's why he's so vexing and confusing to cheer for, because it seemingly is very effort-based. So Connor got a dirty dozen against against Baltimore rather. Big win for Pittsburgh for them to stay undefeated. Very funny for people to write Ben Roethlisberger off very aggressively last year. Oh, maybe that's a career-ending injury. 7-0 now. Cameron and AB massacred him. Good for AB to punch in a win that was frankly a must-have game for him. He's sitting now at 500, and he controls his own fate. And if you're not familiar with what that means, you might be a sports novice, but it's more of a baseball term because of the long pennant race, but it essentially means you're ahead and there's no RNG element of you need someone else to win in order to make the playoffs. You control your own fate. In other words, if you fucking win and just maintain your lead, you don't need anything else to happen. You're not really relying on anything else to occur, so it's AB's division to lose. in his maiden voyage in this league. Frank Gore and Coleman combined for 50 yards and no touchdowns. Thankfully for AB, Tyreek Hill had one of his pop-off games against the terrible Jets. Intelligent of AB to roll the dice with Hardman. If you're going to roster him, and you gave away the Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and it's against the Jets, these are all factors that point to you starting both Kansas City receivers when, in general, normal fantasy logic would dictate, like, oh, well, how are they both going to get targets and a touchdown? Well, if they play the fucking Jets, that's how. And if we look at AB's bench, he had to do this without his quarterback and without his running back. And remember, he early picked up the black AB. So he had sort of like a dead roster spot. Very well done here by Austin to win despite the fact. And Derek Carr, like I said, this Cleveland game was so bizarre. The 16-6, like, these are the sort of games that I feel like a coach like Gruden produces more than any other coach. These like weird grinding games. Who thought that Cleveland would be held to 6 points that game? I mean, they looked anemic. They couldn't get anything on the ground going. And frankly, they kind of looked like they needed OBJ. Is OBJ that big of a deal? Do teams really have to game plan for him? I wish I could ask a head coach this. Like you know, you could ask them in an interview and they wouldn't be honest. But to be able to actually get their real take, like, Gruden, how much do you actually have to prepare for OBJ? How much safety help has to be dedicated? How much do you have to focus on having a certain corner on him? How much more nickel do you have to use? These are the sort of questions that I wonder about, and I sort of consider. Obviously, like, you could break down like how much nickel compared, but like what I'm really concerned about is like the philosophy and the focus of the defense, because stopping the run in football, a lot of it has to do with knowing how much the other team is going to pass and being able to run your personnel out accordingly. So the fact that OBJ is gone could actually bode poorly for Kareem Hunt, unfortunately for me. As far as Cam Cameron goes here, the Niners got negative. No reason to start them versus Seattle, but, you know, let's not nitpick here when there's really no point. Moving on. Jackson lost again despite making good moves. 95 points he put up. Lamar Jackson, he put up 2 pass touchdowns, but those 2 interceptions make it very hard to win against a team like Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh looks very, very good. They're actually my team to win the AFC. I think they'll play the Bucs in the Super Bowl. That's my pick as of right now. Could you imagine if Brady won a ring on another team his first year out of New England? That'd just be incredible. Gio Bernard actually did very well, 20 points in a surprising upset win. Joe Burrow continues to look less and less like a rookie every week. And what's surprising to me is not like how good he looks, because obviously at LSU he looked top tier and phenomenal, and a guy that could come into the NFL and not look lost. But it looks as though he's progressing so insanely rapidly. It looks like he's already a third-year guy. And you look at a guy, both the New York quarterbacks, as I pointed out before, they look like they haven't progressed at all. Darnold looks like he's on week 8 of his rookie year, still seeing ghosts. And Danny Dimes is a fraud. I swear to God, that guy's like hearing impaired. He can't sense anything coming. He's a turnover machine. And it's funny because the New York media would just salivate over these guys and talk about how they were the future. Oh, thank God we drafted a quarterback. Oh, I'm so glad we moved on from Eli. And then they want to crucify him, and it hasn't even been that long. And, you know, as soon as a coach is fired, they want another one. So it's always very pleasurable to see New York teams do badly. You know, as bad as the Cowboys are this year, it must be really bad in New York when they can't even like laugh on and flex at the Cowboys, because both of their teams are worse than the Cowboys. The Cowboys are truly horrific. Oh, they're almost unwatchably bad. It's reached that level, almost where like it's just devoid of comedy, which is really hard to do. Calvin Ridley got banged up, which is funny and noteworthy because this is the last week Jackson had him, and Aaron's problem. He's Aaron's problem now, though. Foot. We'll go through pregame workout. So it's not severe, it's not like he broke his foot, but is somewhat humorous. Hasty punched in 10 here for Jackson. He has a beehive on his head. And this week he already locked in Garbo, I believe. Robert Woods found the end zone in a game that really the Rams had no right losing. And whenever I look at the Rams losing a game like that to Miami, I think a lot of that comes down to coaching. Because Miami looked just horrifically bad. And if you looking like, oh, Miami won, Tua must have done well, and then you actually kind of look at the game, no, the Rams just basically threw up all over themselves and lost. Let's just start in chronological order. Spencer's facing me. If you remember Spencer and I's match history, essentially it's a common theme for me to come in at some sort of depleted state, whether it be due to bye weeks or injuries. And we see again this is the case with my best running back, my kicker, and my solid receivers both being on bye, as presumably if Cleveland was going to start passing and doing anything, this would be the week to Landry to break out this upcoming one, but he's on bye. I'm kind of worried though after that Oakland game, or Vegas. Honestly, I'm glad Vegas is getting sports teams, but I sort of hate it when like the hardcore fan base, like the Oakland Raiders, when that gets ripped away. Like the Oakland fan base was very passionate and hardcore and sort of had this like nasty air, and I thought that was cool, and I just feel like it's sort of callous for it to be ripped away because now it's a trend that all the, every premier sports league wants to shove an organization in Vegas all of a sudden. I feel like, maybe take Jacksonville. There's a team that is just lost and hopeless and really doesn't have any direction. And in my opinion, I know I talk about this nearly every week, but the precipitous decline of the Jacksonville Jaguars was truly jaw-dropping. And frankly, the speed of their ascent, I guess you could consider it a flash in the pan, but the way that they were drafting and getting Tom Coughlin and focusing on defense and having a very young defense that was lethal and a sort of serviceable, grinding, running offensive attack, this was a team that looked like what Tennessee is now. They look like sort of a better version of Tennessee. That peak Saxonville defense, especially in fantasy because they got so many turnovers, they were truly explosive. Tennessee's defense, I feel like, is more just solid. And then you compare like a Derrick Henry to a healthy Fournette. It was very plausible and not ridiculous to see how you could find this team contending for that abominable AFC South division where the Texans are too dim-witted to even use their entire salary cap. It's as though they don't understand how the cap system works. They think like it's like one of those sports games where if you want more cap, you have to pay IRL money, and they think IRL money is draft picks, so they give away draft picks for no reason. The Colts and the whole Andrew Luck fiasco and not having a line for a decade, they're sort of finding their stride now with Phil Rivers, but to me, I don't really trust them. I know they're probably going to make the playoffs, but they're actually a team I would bet against with really almost any other team that's going to make the AFC playoffs. And God forbid if they have to play Pittsburgh. That's going to be murder. They're going to get annihilated by Pittsburgh, especially in Pittsburgh, which presumably because the Steelers are undefeated, that's where their game will be played. But I digress. Back into this matchup. The quarterback matchup is interesting because Breeze is facing Tampa, who's a pretty solid defense, and Breeze is coming off a minor injury, but his boy, Michael Thomas, is probably going to play. Unfortunately for me, right when that happens, Spencer has him, and that's really one of my biggest outs blocked. Breeze has been pretty solid in the last couple weeks without Thomas, and unfortunately for me, I think that if Thomas does come back, he's going to catch a touchdown, and I think he's probably going to, let's just read over his injury, hamstring. So it's a hammy. This is always weird because they're almost always going to say questionable, and a lot of the times it can be 90%, and sometimes it can legit be 40%, and a lot of times they can be diminished. If Thomas is healthy, he's going to have an 80-plus yard game and a touchdown. If he's taking diminished snaps or any of this nonsense, then, that's good for me probably, but It just really blows that this didn't happen like 1 week later, so Spencer couldn't use him against me. Because it's not just, oh, Spencer has his second best weapon back. This is, really, if you just look at the broad scope of things, I need Drew Brees to do well if we look at the rest of my lineup. Keenan Allen, coming off of an injury, he's actually questionable. It's not one of those, it's a cue, but he'll play. Hopkins should do well, yeah, coming off a bye, but Kettle out, I had to go for Logan Thomas. Now, I really like the Redskins with Allen at quarterback as opposed to Haskins. Haskins, I wouldn't trust to pilot a bus or even cook mac and cheese. The guy's really dim and really bad. But Allen can sling it around, and he does it with just recklessness. I think the Panthers last year sort of saw that. They were like, this is amazing. And then he had a few like absolute just stinker games, which it's funny, if you started him in fantasy, oh, the hot hand, Jared Allen, 30 points. You pick him up, and he's like 4 interceptions. Wow. Just horrifically bad. But the Redskins don't have a better option. It's sort of funny to me when these terrible teams like the Giants or the Redskins draft quarterbacks that, I'm no expert, especially about college football, but from my perspective, are pretty obviously not going to work out, or they're like projects or coin flips, but they take them really early, and then they just really don't pan out. To me, like Marcus Mariota was sort of like the prototype of this player where, yeah, he's great in college, but I didn't really ever think that Mariota was going to develop. And we can see now that Tannehill has the keys in Tennessee, Tennessee's great. Tennessee's a legitimate playoff threat. They're the favorite to win their division. They look strong. And for years and years with Mariota at the helm, it was 8-8. And the same old low-ceiling, boring, crappy team. So, glad that Tannehill got a shot. I'm glad his knee is holding up. Obviously, the elephant in the room is Devonte Adams. Okay, Spencer, it doesn't matter how many games you win. You can't keep using the Adams excuse when he's dropping 20 on people's face every week. So, after Spencer beats me this week, I don't want to hear any more Thomas and Adams excuses. Remember last year when Spencer's top guy, Saquon, ran into injury issues and we heard about it nonstop? Well, Zeke is fucking worthless and I took him second overall. Thankfully, I picked up Justin Jackson, who had about 17 carries. Yep, 17 carries last week. And the other guy, I think, only had like 10. So he's the main back in that backfield. They run it a decent amount, and when they're not running it, they're throwing it to Keenan Allen. He led the team in targets last week, and Jackson got 5 of those over the air as well. Ronald Jones, I think that he should be set to not necessarily have a good game, but I don't expect him to have less than 5. I don't think that he's officially lost all of his value, and all of a sudden after weeks and weeks of Jones, now it's only Fournette. And Fournette is like a very streaky guy too, fumble issues of his own, injury issues of his own, so even though Jones had a really ugly performance last week and it didn't bode well for his future, I don't think that he's completely screwed yet. So here in the flex we have Lev Bell going against a terrible, terrible Panthers defense. And unfortunately, he's really not getting a lot of looks. I can potentially plug Zeke in, but he has a good chance to play. Well, I mean, the Cowboys have a good chance to get shut out, so I don't really want to play Zeke. And as far as Lev Bell goes, if ever there was a week for him to break out, it was this. Hopefully he's going to find his footing, and Damien won't step in and cock block him or Hilaire. I just hope it's him or Hilaire. Like, if the third guy is stepping in and getting it, that's just atrocious. That's pretty much just bad news for everyone. So there's another backfield in the NFL that's sort of like that, where everything is sort of so balanced where it's terrible and unplayable, and it's the Rams between Akers and Brown and Darrell Henderson. Their touches are very evenly spaced out. It makes them all very inconsistent. And forget trying to predict which one's going to find the end zone. Remember, Jared Goff threw over 60 times last week. In many ways, the coach that just everyone loves to slurp, Sean McVay, he sort of manages the game as though it's a college game in terms of the offensive play calls he does. And for fantasy, it kind of makes it like the Patriots in the sense where there's too many mouths. As many of you know, the ideal fantasy sort of setup is a pretty high-powered offense where it's almost certainly going to be run through one person. That's why Zeke Elliott was considered top tier for years, and you don't really need me to make any more examples because it's a rather obvious sort of concept. So really no way on paper Spence loses, but that's how it's been the last 2 weeks we've played, and thanks to Janu Smith among others, I have managed to come up with huge victories. But my God, how do I lose, or how do I win rather, with all these good matchups for Spence and already 23 locked in? Hopefully Spencer can climb up to 3-6. Here we have a daughter against the father and the commissioner. Tom Brady against New Orleans, that'll be a phenomenal game. Really one that's worth watching. God, I hope Thomas plays. It's really sad when these games happen on Sunday night, prime time. It's so exciting, especially with a team like the new look Tampa Bay, who are really showing off what they've got. It's not like the old school Patriots where you know what you're going to get and you've seen it a million times. This is still an interesting team, especially with AB coming around. They're always developing still and improving. I just love watching Tom play. To me, he's the greatest of all time, and he's a great leader. Father Time just can't catch up to the guy. Love watching him play. He doesn't virtue signal. He's a guy who brings up others around him and makes mid-tier players way better than they have any right being. And he's a guy I root for. And to me, he's a guy like Jeter, where even if you don't like him, you have to respect him. Gonna love seeing him face off against Breeze, who's also future Hall of Famer, exceptionally talented. And hopefully Breeze, he doesn't even carry an injury designation anymore, but he's a little bit banged up this week, and that worries me because he's my guy, literally, quarterback. So, Galliman, I don't trust this guy at all, even though he's playing Washington. This is a player who, even on this offense, didn't accrue very many touches, and it's on a shit tier offense that turns it over a lot. So I'm not really feeling that start. And if we go down, we can see, well, what do you see? We can see Harris is questionable. You know, let's just, might as well fucking, ankle is listed as questionable. The Patriots famously are like tight-lipped about injuries, so that's why I was sort of vexed about clicking it. 17 players listed as questionable, so it's clear there's a bit of gamesmanship being played. Yeah, gamesmanship. It's called the guy in the hoodie with no sleeves. That's all that is, so sort of stupid. And you know, some bozo, like, who's just randomly run into Belichick at, like, some diner in Massachusetts has been like, you need to, my fantasy team, it's hard because I don't know if guys are going to play. And, like, Belichick hears that and does that, like, Belichick chuckle. Just, like, he loves the fact that he makes people miserable, so. I just hate the way the Patriots handle injuries, but they're playing the fucking Jets. Let it fly. Start the guy. What are you doing? What are you doing? You got Emmanuel Sanders in, who's been shit all year, and Michael Thomas is coming back, and Tampa's pretty damn good. You know, I'm doing the video, you can see in the bottom right. It's 5 a.m. The games start at 7. I do the videos at this time, or, you know, at Saturday, so people can have the longest time to set their lineup. I don't have to sit there with my dick in my hand. Ooh, maybe we'll start him, maybe we'll start him. A lot of the times people will have their lineup set to pretty much what it's going to be by Saturday, or I guess Sunday morning, but, you know, obviously Harris wouldn't have been moved out of the lineup if he didn't have an injury designation, but you've got to imagine he's going to have to find a way to play Harris, I suppose. that's just me speculating, but McKinnon actually managed to put it a dozen in a San Francisco team that, because of injuries, has just looked terrible compared to what they did last year. As far as Lily goes, I feel like Diggs, Jefferson, Wilson, Gurley, this core of her team is going to carry her to victory. And the real crux of this game, first time maybe, love you buddy, is Christian McCaffrey. He came back from an injury and was severely banged up. Remember, he missed several weeks. This is the great white hope. This is the best running back in the league. Firecracker, consensus #1 overall pick, one of my favorite players personally, a guy that you just love to root for. And this is going to be a make or break game for Kev, the commish, because last week it was injuries, sminjuries. Is that the three of clubs? Gin. And for me personally, that excuse really wasn't cutting it when George Kittle went down. And to see McCaffrey finally come back, I was in trades with the commish, basically trying to trade my whole team away from McCaffrey, and he was basically told me to kick rocks. So it was nice to win that close game last week, even though, of course, it's like nothing personal and I love him, but it was very nice to win that close game, and it would just be terrible to be staring down the barrel of only one game behind me and the second place person in my division, because I'm probably going to lose to Spencer this week. This is one of those funny things where really my biggest advantage, and I know that this is like obviously like sort of like mythical or superstitious, but Spencer has so many advantages over me this week. Literally my biggest advantage is like history and luck of like, well, he's had advantages over me in the past, and yes, I'm aware they're not correlated, but it's just sort of a funny way of pointing out how severely ahead he is this week. Even if Adams was playing on Sunday, I'd be sitting here saying, and Adams is going to go fucking crazy. He's going to pop off. So, must-win game for Spence, and he really is favored heavily. But going back to this one, which I think is a significantly less interesting matchup in many ways, if we look at Tyler Lockett and Godwin, these are two guys who are explosive. It's either Lockett or Metcalf popping off. We can see Lockett is ranked #1, and Metcalf is also ranked very high. Remember, this like 40-point game sort of fucks up the average, but that offense where Russell Wilson just airs it out, that's a phenomenally powerful offense, guaranteed to get a lot of touchdowns consistently year after year. And to me, Russell Wilson is a guy who has proven himself as a Pro Bowl quarterback, and I don't think in any way is overrated. And I think even though I don't like Pete Carroll and he's sort of like a goof, they do manage to consistently put up points. And if you're looking at fantasy football just on a very basic level, I know a lot of people sort of get caught up in the minutia, and a lot of people who have played for a long time sort of already know this, or it's like old hat, but you have to consider like teams except the Cowboys and the fucking Jets are going to score touchdowns, and unless they're on the ground, which rarely in the NFL as years go on, it's becoming less common for the running back to be the focus of the offense. A receiver will catch the ball. Like quarterbacks are going to air it out 20 plus times on every team, even the run first teams, and there's probably going to be at least one touchdown catch. So a lot of times, that's when you have to dig on the waiver wire and sort of guess. Like, even though this guy's not a name, like, maybe you consider that there's another injury and that he got moved up in the depth chart. Or the point I'm making is this, is like there is value to be salvaged out of bad teams. And on phenomenally good teams like the Seahawks, you have guys like Metcalf and Lockett, which can actually both coexist as two top-tier fantasy receivers, which is very uncommon. And speaking of that, last year we saw another example of that with Godwin and Mike Evans. And we can see that this year, even though they are both still legitimate threats, especially for defensive coordinators, they are not as much of a threat, because let's consider how the Tampa Bay team won last year, or how their games went in general, win or lose. They passed the ball a bunch, and they would fall behind because Weston would throw a bunch of picks, and then in order to catch up, Godwin and Evans would go deep. And Winston doesn't give a shit. He just let that thing fly without a care in the world. And there's something to be said about that. The problem is that's also how he approaches like short-range passes, passes to the flat, cross patterns. Like that's how he plays all the time. He just throws caution to the wind. But honestly, even though Winston is sort of a gaff machine and a goofball, and I could go on, but I won't. It is sort of nice to see a guy like him just to be able to say fuck it and just air it out with everything he has. Cowboy fans seeing Dak Prescott, between his horrific inaccuracy and Michael Gallup's pan hands, my goodness, watching this team is an eternal struggle. But overall, if we just focus on this matchup fantasy-wise, I think that the commish is slightly favored because McCaffrey's going to come back. They're going to do everything they can to get him the ball. And remember, crucially, Mike Davis is on Weston's team. So that is a piece of Weston's team that goes down in value. And I also think Robbie Anderson goes down a little bit in value as well. So I'm going to give the edge of the commish. We have Cam Joke versus Jackson. Jackson already has less than 10 points locked in from his running back, so I'm going to be quick with this one. Really, the funnest part of this matchup is going to be to see if Cameron fixes that bye. If we look at his bench, the infamous Jonnu Smith is on there, so it should be a very easy swap-a-reno. But I'm not going to beat a dead horse. Jackson has made good moves to try to stay in it, but this week he got popped with a couple buys, and already he kind of got buried. Chris Carson's out, which really sucks. Weston got his backup, and Aaron Jones, Aaron Jones weirdly has like Tyreek Hill type numbers in terms of, obviously with the running back he's a bit higher floor, but this is a guy that has those monstrous pop-off games. Really great pick. I feel like in the last couple years, the Packers' backfield has become way less gimmicky, and it's just way less of a crapshoot. For many years, the Packers' backfield was just like the Patriots' backfield. You couldn't rely on anyone. Too much timeshare Reno. Just Garbo. But for Jackson, it's a Garbo production for his running back, so that really sucks. Hopefully for him, Christian Kirk can have a big week against Miami. Expect Arizona to kill Miami. I think that Miami has a poor performance. I do not think that squeaking out with a win last week will be like a confidence boost. I think Arizona, after their bye, ooh man, they're going to make Miami look bad. Speaking of making people look bad, this is going to be, I think, another brutal loss for Jackson, who, despite not even necessarily managing poorly, has just found himself in a very precarious position record-wise. Notice that Cam started the Niners versus Green Bay. This is a depleted Niners defense that put up negative points last week. And, there's not a lot of good options on the wire, but it was sort of obvious that the Packers were going to do well. And in general, I'm not like holding on to the Niners defense. Like, the Niners and the Cowboys are both trending on the down low, and even though it's sort of funny because the Cowboys in the preseason are always vaunted as this team with all the big names, all the weapons. They got the Campbell Soup quarterback. They're in a shit division. They're going to be good, and like they're always disappointing. And you see teams like this, which like the Niners, they made it to the Super Bowl last year. They got ripped apart by injuries. And they can still start Nick Mullins and at least not like be embarrassing. Like, yeah, they're losing still, but it's not embarrassing. Like, they're scoring touchdowns for Christ's sake. Oh my goodness, the Cowboys are horrifically bad. So advantage Cam here, who hilariously is still in first. Heard King of the Funny's getting out early though. Very important matchup here. No fried rice for you. Taking on Austin. And AB, Kyler Murray is back. He is going to scorch earth Miami. Miami, a lot of people I feel like are on the Tua bandwagon because there are probably 5 people from college football every year that the casual college football fan becomes acquainted with. And guess what? Tua was one of those guys for like 3 or 4 years. Oh, actually, not 4. He was like that for 3 years. And everyone was familiar with this guy because he was there front and center with Bama as they were winning. And of course, he came in, I think it was to replace Jalen Hurts. I can't, I'm no college football expert, but that's what I recall. And usually, if I recall it, it's correct. But Pat Mahomes is facing off against Kyler Murray, and both these guys are going to have pop-off games. Expect 20 plus from both. So Leonard Fournette, this one I think crucially is almost going to be more important for my matchup than it will be for AB's, because Dobbins is bad, and it's not going to be a threat. Help fill in for Ingram. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. See, like, the Baltimore Ravens have actually been way less explosive this year than they were in the previous year. And a lot of why they were good was this sort of like wishbone style run heavy attack with Ingram. And Gus Edwards was like definitively like a third down guy that wasn't worth starting in fantasy unless Ingram was hurt. But this year they look a lot worse. So I don't have any faith in Dobbins, who's facing off against a solid Colts defense. And the reason I was talking about Fournette being a big deal as far as my game goes is if Ronald Jones gets like 5 touches and Fournette gets 20 as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers roll the Saints, then Jones's value suddenly becomes very low. But if this is like another disappointing Fournette game, where he either fumbles or isn't performing well or gets hurt, not only will it pretty much seal the victory for AB, but it'll have a huge impact on my team going forward with the beleaguered Zeke Elliott. Metcalf is just going to do very well. I have faith in him and Lockett both pretty much every week. And unfortunately for No Fried, the tight end already took a dump in his mouth and got him 0.5. Steelers are playing the Dallas defense. They could honestly get 20 plus and swing the game because the Cowboys are that fucking bad. And I know I've spoken about how bad the Cowboys are at length, but this game that you're about to see, man, it's going to be horrific. Slyly, don't expect much from him. I don't think the Panthers are going to... I think they're going to like focus on getting McCaffrey the ball a lot, but I don't think it's going to be a competitive game versus Kansas City. And overall, you really have to favor Austin here as we take a peek, see at the benchies. Unfortunately for No Fried, Cooper Kupp, who literally got like 20 targets last week, is on bye. And for AB, Joe Mixon's on bye, which is actually good because he was banged up. And I would start Smith-Schuster. He's playing Dallas's defense, for Christ's sake. And, of course, Robinson just gets so many carries. The Jacksonville running back, James Robinson, this is a guy who, no matter how bad Jacksonville is losing, they give an insane amount of looks to. It's actually mind-blowing how often this guy gets the rock. Like, game script does not affect him. He's just like Josh Jacobs in that regard. So even though Jacksonville keeps throwing up all over themselves and is just on a fucking free fall for like the last 3 years, and no matter how above average Minshew looks, they can't stop losing. Robinson, he's going to get the ball. And this is sort of why Fournette had value, but he couldn't fucking stay healthy, so... Very funny. Anyway, Tyreek Hill is going to have a great day versus Carolina. Antonio Brown gets the start. I feel like that's really weird because think about, I know people say this a lot, but think about all the weapons, about both the running backs, Fournette and Jones, Godwin and Evans, who are both very good, Gronk, that other tight end, and then AB. And I actually think that it's his first game and he's a diva, so they will actually look to get him the ball early on, like we saw when he was on the Pats for like 2 weeks. But as far as AB goes, I just feel like it's sort of a risky start. And I feel like there is a decent amount of upside, but it's also not like he joined the Bills of 2 years ago and it was like, oh, they didn't even have like a receiver worth a shit. Now that guy's going to get 10 plus targets. It's like he joined the offense that has the most weapons. And he's probably going to get to win some playoff games, but if he's going to be me, and like want the ball like he wanted when he was in Pittsburgh, and he would just like yell at Roethlisberger just to air it out for him on go routes, it's not going to be good for him. So, although I do, like I said, I think that he will have some game focus early on. Frank Gore, I mean, he plays for the Jets. That's all you need to know. And if we look at AB, he's also starting Hardman, which, like, he's almost certainly going to start Juju. This is 100% must start. Like, even mid-tier guys, when they face the fucking Cowboys, become must start. So, obviously, you're going to start Juju here, and probably going to take out Hardman. But to me, like, this game was going to be kind of hard to lose. You already have him hamstrung at tight end, and a lot of questions. You do really have to watch out for the Steelers, and I would honestly start Roethlisberger too over Mahomes. I mean, they're going to light up Dallas. They're going to light them up. But advantage AB here, definitely. I think that once he can get out of starting Frank fucking Gore, who is like absolutely horrible and 50 years old, he'll be in a better position. But even though he's projected to win, I really feel like he is the favorite. Like, I feel like he should be projected to win by more, I suppose, would be the better way to say that. Alright, King of Funny versus Seagoucher. And unfortunately, as you can imagine, since Adams had 23 locked in, Aaron Rodgers did pretty damn well. 4 passing touchdowns, 300 plus yards, pretty much what Christian was expecting. I am officially out of water. Jared Allen, or Josh Allen rather, Jared Allen. Been fucking playing like Jared Allen. Playing Seattle, which Joe Burrow's on bye, so that fucking sucks. David Johnson, Jesus Christ. So there's really no way that Ben wins this. He has Mike Evans, who's going to get cucked by Antonio Brown. Scary Terry might have a 2-touchdown game. That's a potential out. Chase Edmonds, I think, has a potential for a big game, but man, I think it's coming up Seagouch here. Edwards-Helaire, Carolina does not look good. Jacobs is going to get a fuckload of touches against a team that's not very good. Lindsey will play even though he has a question. It's just going to be brutal for Ben, I feel like, to overcome the running back disadvantage. But if Lindsey can actually stay in and is healthy enough to get more than 10 freaking touches, when he does touch the ball, he's phenomenal. But there is potential for Ben to win, with Lindsey's high upside, McLaurin with the weak as fuck matchup. Edmonds, I feel like, is set to have a great matchup, and the Cardinals are set to do well versus Miami, so I like this. I like this for Ben, but with 30 already on the board for Gouch, the thing about Gouch's team, though, is I'm not digging these receivers. Amari Cooper is, like, horrifically bad. Caught 1 of 2 targets. And Marquise Brown has never been very good. And what are his other options? Hilton, who's been unstartable all season. Doesn't have a lot of options. Man, that might actually swing it. Chark is bad because they run so much. Damn. I think I'm going to edge Christian here by less than 5 points. I think that his running backs will carry him over, although Ben does definitely have some outs here. The fact that Rodgers locked in 30 is the defining factor. I think that Ben will lose by less than 12, though. Right here we have Rampy versus Weston. I think Weston's just going to fucking annihilate him. Weston's red hot right now. Just look at Weston's team. You have Hebert, who, despite being young, actually airs it out enough and has like enough go off and back and forth games to be like a damn fine starting option. You have Derrick Henry, top tier. Think about this. With Zeke and McCaffrey both being like hurt / worthless this year, Derrick Henry is pretty much the de facto best running back. Then you have the Seattle running back that is going to replace the banged up Chris Carson. He had 18 last week. Now granted, they were playing San Francisco. Now they're playing Buffalo in Buffalo, so I don't expect them to get over 12. But I do think that that was a good pickup by Weston. Julio Jones is healthy. Like, that's what freaking Weston was waiting on. And Robinson is benefiting from a Bears team that is finally deciding that it's had enough of the Mitch era, at least the unpressured Mitch era. Kelsey is Kelsey. Is a great matchup too. Zach Moss, I'm not a huge fan of Zach Moss. Like, it's him and Singletary, sort of like, it's brutal because him and Singletary are a true timeshare, and Singletary was barely startable last year, and Zach Moss is more of a threat to him, so then he obviously like wasn't around then, but as far as Zach Moss is more of a threat to Singletary than the other people Singletary had to deal with before. And he's doing this because Mike Davis is getting bounced back, because McCaffrey's back, and Henderson is on bye. So what do we think about this matchup? Well, Cam Newton's facing the Jets, but I mean, it's sort of like an immovable object meets a screaming force of worthlessness or something. Like, that's just going to be a shit show. Presumably the Jets suck less than Cam, though. Cam and Connor are just going to fucking run wild. My God. They're going to probably combine for 35 plus. Ridley a little bit banged up, but I'm pretty sure he'll play. May not play. Aren't optimistic. Okay, so maybe he'll miss it, and Aaron will have to play fucking Parker, who has a rookie quarterback. You're not going to play CeeDee Lamb for the Cowboys now, are you? Ugh. Yeah. So, like, I look at Aaron's running back situation, I'm like, oh, it looks great. And then considering Ridley might not play, and this Claypool guy, I mean, Grant, he's facing Dallas, so that's actually good. He's probably going to have over 13, but I just don't believe in him overall. I'm sort of low on all of Tampa's receivers, with AB being dropped into the mix. I really don't think it means like they're terrible now or anything, but I want to see how it fleshes out this week. And also, like, there are so many weapons on that offense, it's just sort of become watered down at this point. And it's fun as fuck to watch, but pretty shitty for fantasy. So, not really feeling Gronk, not really feeling Singletary, like I was saying. Him and Zach Moss, to me, are both, like, not that great. Singletary, like, gets more looks, so his floor is lower, but Aaron's team to me has some holes, has some things to be worried about. I love the start of the Redskins against the Giants, who suck penis. This one's weird. I mean, obviously you got to give it to Weston. He's red hot, and his team is just very top heavy and scary. But I mean, my God, can you imagine if Ridley is injured, how many targets Julio will get against Denver? Advantage Weston. So just to wrap up the video, here are the division standings. I'm still in the lead, although it will narrow, I suspect, at the end of this week. AB is in the lead at 4-4. Thankfully, someone in that division finally got the record at least to 500. And then Cam Joke holding a very narrow one-game lead over No Fried and Ben. And then Aaron's sort of right there at 3-5. So I actually think the bottom division is the most interesting, because it has like the most hilarious results. The middle one is just like too disgraceful to like really find funny, and then the top one, like, it's too scary to laugh at. This one though, where we're 8 weeks in and Cameron's leading. Oh yeah, that'll put a smile on my face. Make sure you like the video.